Thank you.
All right, how are you guys doing today? All right, before we start the lecture, is there any issues that you're having in the course itself at this point? So everyone knows that they have to be doing the readings, and then the midterm, you have a week to complete it. I would suggest you write it on a Word document, and at the end, then you can just upload that Word document, or you can paste it, however you want to do it. Yeah.
So it has to be done by the 11th, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Is that what it says on the assignment thing? Yeah. Yeah. So you have some time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it should be enough for you, right? So next week then, because you're doing your midterm, there's no class next week. Okay? But after that, then there's class, right? So next week, no class, and the week after that, we're going to have another guest lecture, right? So now we're in the last stage of our class where we're going to be having guest lectures and stuff like that. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. What about paper proposals or topics?
Yeah, we just need to submit the midterm, not the paper proposal.
Just the midterm right now. You need to focus on. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. So we are. Hey, welcome. All right. So some of you guys might the code might not be working.
Yeah.
So if it's not working for you, send me an email and just say I attended today, and then I'll count that as your attendance. Okay. All right. All right, so we're very honored today to have Dr. Bina Sengar, who is a visiting Fulbright scholar here. So I don't know if you guys know about the Fulbright program, but it's a very prestigious and very difficult grant to get. So we're very honored that she's here, and she's working with the Global Indigenous Forum. So indigenous means sort of native communities, and she works on native communities in India, and she's doing a project looking at native communities in India and native communities in the United States, and seeing, sort of the similarities and differences in terms of how they are dealing with religion and modernity. So that's her larger project. And today she has worked on Muslim communities in Western India. And she's going to give us a little bit of sort of an overview of sort of her work on Islam, because this is an Islamic studies course.
Sure.
All right, welcome, Bina.
Yeah, a very good afternoon to all of you. I'm very honored to Dr. Iqbal, he gave me this opportunity to interact with you and share some of my experiences of a study on South Asia Islam, especially in respect to the Deccan region. As he already introduced you about me, that I'm working on indigenous communities. So I try to look into Islam in terms of the indigenous perspective, like how the indigenous or so-called native communities of any area look into a different kind of ideology, a cultural praxis, and how they adopt it or how they make it one of itself. How they create, how what we could say, an arriving cultural practice make itself part of a cultural homogeneity and become part of that homogeneous system. So this way, when almost 10 years ago, I joined services in this university as an assistant professor of history, I started looking into how tribals are looking into a predominantly Islamic dominated society. Aurangabad, as you could see, name itself says, Aurangabad was a city which was founded in 17th century by a very famous Mughal emperor, rather one of the last well-known renowned Mughal emperor of India, Aurangzeb, or Aurangzeb Alamgir also, he is quite popularly known, and he established that city. And although in present scenario the city has only 22% population of Islamic people, but even then the tehzib of that city is predominantly, I won't even call it Islamic in broader sense, but it has a lot of influence of that tehzib which we often connote to be Islamic. I'll begin with a very beautiful sonnet, very beautiful couplets by Amir Khusro. I hope you must have heard about Amir Khusro. We'll discuss about him. Khusro once wrote, खुसरो दरिया प्रेम का उल्टी बाकी धार, जो उतरा सो डूब गया, जो डूबा सो पार. These are the beautiful line which says that the ocean of love is having a reverse tide. If you just try to get into it, you will certainly get drowned. But to reach out to the other part, you have to first drown yourself. Only then you can become the survivor of that love ocean or the ocean of love. Somehow, when the cultures blend together, they are not like something who just come together. They actually become one to each other by merging themselves or drowning each other's identity to the other self. That is the way we expect or we understand culture in its process. Aurangabad, as you could see, the abstract also says, it has its own Deccani-Tehzib. How this Deccani-Tehzib became what we know it today, or what it has given in so far in last 700 years to the society of Aurangabad and society at large in the global context. It has been studied widely. Believe me, every university in US has one or the other scholars who has visited this city and has tried to explore the diversity and the cultural givings or the cultural outcomes of this city. So we'll try to understand how this city or this whole phenomena of Aurangabad happened and how it contributed to something called as Islam in Deccan. This is the place called Deccan, or in the Sanskritic sources on the so-called pre-Islamic era sources, we call it as Dakshinapada. It so happened that, as you could see, the peninsular part, this is, do we have a point or something? Click. No, it's all right. I'll come this side. So this is like the peninsular part of India, and we have three important cities. One is Devgiri, another is, as you could see, it is broadly over here. Okay, just a second. This is Daulatabad, this is Aurangabad, and there you have Paitan. These are, oh please come, please. Sure. There are three cities which eventually, as time passed, like it was believed that when the Islamic or the ruling classes came in the northern part of the Deccan Delhi Sultanate, they always wanted to go beyond the territories of what you called as Narmada river. There is a river called Narmada, which you can see, and it was believed that like all the golds, all the precious things, all the richness of India to a large extent lays in southern parts of India. I hope you are aware about the concept of Deccan, or it's like totally new to you. Because if I'm talking about Deccan, it should not happen that like you're all saying.
Sounds like.
Yeah. Anybody has any idea what Deccan is? Like I was like. Anyway, like you all know what is South Asia, of course, and you know like South Asia has different regions. What are the prominent South Asian regions? Physiographic regions. No idea. Okay, you know Himalayas? Yes. So Himalayas extends from where to where? Like how big is Himalayas? How large is Himalayas? Like it is the largest mountain range of the world. It's larger than Andes, isn't it? It is larger than Andes mountain range, and it extends from. I'm really. I should have brought because you know history without geography is like falling in love without a virtual woman. Like you fall in love with a virtual ID. If you don't know the geography, you don't know history. So okay, let's sketch out a little bit. You all know where is Iran, and you all know where is Myanmar, Burma. Okay, so and you all have heard about something called as Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So that is known as Central Asia. So there is like we have something called as Pamir. Pamir is a knot, and we call it as Pamir knot, which is considered to be the roof of the central and roof of Asia. We often call it as roof of Asia, and from there so many different mountain ranges go. And so one such mountain range is Himalayas. So the eastern tract which goes from here. As you could see, the topmost you have, that is the Indus River, the line from, and from there till here, you have the Himalayan mountain ranges. That is known as the northern physiographic limit of India. or broadly saying South Asia. And in this whole South Asian region, you have Afghanistan towards its west, Pakistan towards its northwest, you have entire India, then on the foothills, rather on the Himalayas and on the foothills, we have Nepal, then we have Tibet, which is now part of China, then you have Bhutan, and then in the eastern flank, you have Myanmar. This is called as the northern physiographic region of South Asia. Below this, you have all these rivers. You are seeing this is Indus, this is Ganges, and then you have the Brahmaputra. These are known as the river valley areas. This is considered to be the most fertile river valley region of the world. Okay? And then you have this whole peninsular part is known as the plateau, which has in its periphery the ocean beaches or the ocean flank. This Deccan Plateau is considered to be one of the oldest physiographic plateau region of the world. It is from the times of the Pangaea. I don't want to go into the geological history now, because then you go to Pangaea, the whole world was one, and then the whole shifting happened. So Deccan happens to be the very old plateau region, and being the oldest plateau region, it has some of the most richly acclaimed mineral resources. Some of the best diamond, gold, and all the metal or the ore sites are here. So it is one of the richest zone of what do you call as South Asia, because all the mineral resources are here. Another important point is it also has some of the oldest surviving human communities living in this region, because it was the oldest region of the entire world. So some of the communities are also living in this area for very long time. So when in the northern part of India, different parts of nomadic people who were fighting for, I won't say fighting, when the like prior to Islam, we already had Buddhist, so-called Buddhist people in name of Mongol raiding were all over the world. So the same Mongols, when they adopted Islam, they continued to raid different parts of the world. They invaded Turkey, they invaded Europe, and they also invaded India. And so from the 9th century onwards, they started invading India as well, and they started establishing their capital in Delhi. So Delhi was the seat of what is well known as Delhi Sultanate, and whoever ruled in Delhi Sultanate was always vying to come and rule Deccan as well. The reason? Wealth, the rich, gold, diamonds and all such stuff. But it was not always for the looting. Always the loot was not the purpose, because there are other means also through which you communicate to the community and get their good thing. Like we all are, majority of us are immigrants here. We are not coming here and looting US. We are coming here and giving our services to US and getting in return whatever we could get, isn't it? So the same thing was happening even in Deccan. Other than like invaders, there were also a lot of traders, there were lots of travelers, there were lots of adventure people who were coming and trying to look into the Deccan and its resources and trying to get their share through the kind of services they were providing. This is also the way through which Islam happened to be in Deccan by the 7th and later by 9th century as well. And how it reached to the city of Devgiri or Daulatabad becomes the investigative approach for today's lecture. Is it okay? Or not getting bored? Just say, whenever you're getting bored, just let me know. I'll try to make some poetries. I got some Amir Khusro poetries with me. So these are city peripheries and history. So it is believed that in the normative narratives of the Islamic historiography or even the historiography which is popularly taught among the people, is often said that the Islam in Deccan came because of invasions. We always begin with how Islam came in Deccan. You will find the normal textual references will always speak. Alauddin Khilji, who was ruler of Khalji dynasty, who was ruling in Delhi from 1296 to 1360. He came for the first time in 1296 in Devgiri, he found it very rich, very captivating, and so he decided to invade it, and he started looting it, and he went back. Again in 1308, he sent his chief, very famous chief Malik Kafur, to go and invade again Devgiri and bring all the booty and make me rich. These are the popular narratives. Then you had the very famous story of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, because he was very much afraid of Mongols and their recurrent invasions in the Delhi. Believe me, again, it's not Islam always invading the system. Anybody, even like Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who himself is an Islamic ruler, is always scared of Mongols, who are also Islamic from Central Asia. So he doesn't want any more fights with them. So he decides to shift the capital of Delhi and bring it to Devgiri or Daulatabad. Third narrative is about Malik Ambar, who is another very famous tribal chief from Ethiopia, who was abducted at a very young age from Ethiopia, brought to Arabia, again retrained, and was sold as a slave to the Nizam Shahi dynasty of Ahmednagar, and later on he becomes the de facto ruler of the Nizam Shahi dynasty, and he tries to create Daulatabad and Aurangabad cities. And then there is another person, the very famous Aurangzeb, who creates the present Aurangabad. So these are the usual discourses through which we believe Islam came to Deccan. But is it true? Or how far we can develop a critique of this whole idea? So there are various, you all are grad students and probably you will be planning to do some research in future. So now we are contesting this whole idea. We as historians, we as theorists, we as ethnographers, we as anthropologists, we believe no, this is not the truth. We cannot keep on telling the stories of valor and invasion to be the truth. We cannot create a false basis. Every time it's not always the fights which create a cultural, pragmatic expansion of a society. There are other means too. Fighting can never be accepted by a stable society. And culture cannot grow, culture cannot be universally accepted unless and until it will have components of peace in it. So there are methods through which peace becomes a message to carry forward the society's message to another society. And that's why the debates and documents are speaking some different narrative. We have some very famous scholars. We have Aditya Behel, we have Jack Hawley, we have Deep Pradandikar, we have Karl Ernst, we have some very wonderful scholars. Like, you would love to read them. If you ever get an opportunity, you should read them about the narratives of Aurangabad. And they came up with the findings, they came up with their research findings, and they said no, Islam happened to be in this region of Deccan before even Alauddin Khilji thought of coming to Deccan. That is 1296, when he is supposed to, when the documentary evidences are saying that he came and he invaded a place called Daulatabad. I'll show you that. This is the Daulatabad, but I'll talk about Khalji's legacy later. So let's come to the debates and documents. So the very important source which is talking about the Islam's incursions in the Deccan, and there are two ways to look into Deccan. One is the peripheral, that is the beach area or the ocean fronts. So we have Indian Ocean port area from Bharuch to Kutch, Bharuch and Bombay and all. Not Bombay, of course, during those times it was mainly Chaul and Rajapur and all those places. But these are the coastal areas. But what about the hinterland and the interior? Because Aurangabad was, as I had shown you in the previous map, Aurangabad was not in the coastal areas, it was in the more or less central part of Deccan. So how the Islam was travelling so far, how the ideology, the cultural practices were going so much inside. So there are various narratives. In terms of, if we'll talk about the Islam and its theory, Islam and its practices, or Islam, the people who actually practiced Islam, how they are supposed to have gone inside. So we get two important references. This is a dargah of Sheikh Jalaluddin Ganjirawa. And this is Dargah of Sayyid Maula Nuruddin, who is a Bohra Sufi saint. These are the two Sufi shrines in Aurangabad region. This is a shrine called Pariyon Ka Talab, Ganjirawa Dargah, who was a Suhrawardi Sufi as per the oral narratives. And this is the Dargah of Sayyid Maula Nuruddin. He was a Bohra Sufi saint and who belonged to the Bohra sect. I think Iqbal can help me more in that. So these two saints are supposed to brought the idea of Sufism for the first time in the region of Deccan. Why I am talking about village deities and divinities here? Because they were not the urban saints. They were not the saints who were situating themselves in the big cities of that area. They were going in these small towns and they are settling themselves in those areas and they are trying to facilitate people with the basic ideology. It is believed that Hazrat Jalaluddin Ganjirawa, he came in from Central Asia and mainly the Afghanistan and Iran area, and he went to, there is a small town called Khuldabad. Near Khuldabad he went there and he tried to alleviate some of the magical things which were going on in that small village, and he tried to help people out with that, and therefore gradually people gave him a shrine, a place, they developed his khanka in a place where previously there was a temple. And even now we find those, what you could say, we find the relics of the temple. We find a Shivalinga, a Yoni, a small temple thing, there is a pond there, and there he was situated. On the other side, Sayyid Nuruddin, who was basically initially he was a tradesman. He happened to be in Turkey. He was a traveler and merchant traveler. So he went to Turkey and from there he got influenced by the idea of Islam, and there he even changed his name. And after coming back, he started preaching the ideas of Islam to his communities. So the first initial lessons of Islam to the people in Deccan were not through invasions but through cultural contact of basically to solve their grievances, and also when you go out of your limits or your comfort zone and you learn something new and then you bring about a new ideology. So this was the beginning of Islam in that.
What period was that again? What years?
These are this is happening in the 11th century, 11th and 12th century. Yeah.
So were these Sufi saints only trying to help people, like maybe heal them, or
Exactly.
were they actively trying to convert, or just something?
That's this is a very important aspect. Like when we often think about why this whole narrative of conversion is coming, because not always in fact, never in history we ever found that conversion is forcibly done. People often convert themselves either because of convenience or because of some lucrative things, and many times it's not even conversion. For example, you or I visit church, so we don't become Christians. We go out of curiosity, we go out of our own solace, but we don't come out of being a Christian. Or we visit a dargah and we don't become an Islamic, but we respect and try to imbibe certain components of that faith. So many, yes?
You said that the region was already Muslim prior to the people coming in, correct?
No, I
Did I
was...
get that part wrong?
I was telling about that this whole region, like Islam is like, it becomes a global, not even a global, it emerged in 7th century. And that is the time when it is spreading itself. People are learning its ideology, some of them are getting influenced by it, some of them are liking it, so they are adopting it also. So somewhere around 7th century onwards, we start getting the influence of Islam in the coastal parts of Deccan or the South India. But how it starts getting into the interior parts, that is what I am seeking. So somewhere around 9th century onwards, we start getting the historical evidences that somewhere around after 9th, even after 8th and 9th centuries, from the coastal area, it starts entering the hinterland areas and it gets into the people of this region. And the city Aurangabad, Aurangabad, Daulatabad and Paitan, which I am talking about, is talking about these all transitions, how these things are entering. This is another site, the same Jalaluddin Ganjeramas. This is a Urs which is happening over there, and it continues even in the 21st century. People still go to that dargah irrespective of whether they are Hindus or Muslim, because even today the shrine is believed to have some miraculous power through which a woman can have her child, especially women's, if they have some kind of psychosomatic disorders, they get cured. So these kinds of faith are there, and even today, like many of the women who believe that they are not getting cured in psychiatric healing, they prefer going to this dargah and they feel that they are getting cured. So these are certain components of village systems. Like many of the times, there are debates about, there are two very important scholars, Dushan Deek and D. Pradandika. They are debating that many of these dargahs, they claim to be like overall, like when political narratives are coming, they are talking about that these dargahs are Islamic. But actually they are not promoting Islam as such, they are the accepted village phenomena, and they are not in quote unquote in a very strict sense they are promoting or delivering the sermons on Islam. They are certain, they are to a large extent serving the society, and just because they are Islamic, we try to brandize Islam or we try to connote them as Islamic centers of healing or worship or whatever. Now we come to, so this is what I am talking about is the pre-Khalji. What is usually called as the invasion thing was not there. The culture of Islam was already there when Khaljis happened to be in Daulatabad or Devgiri. So it is 1308 when Khalji Alauddin Khilji orders one of the chief to go and invade Devgiri fort. This is a very old photograph of Devgiri fort. This is a new one. I just took it from the Google. I deliberately try to, because this word says Gyani Pandit, so we have lots of virtual Gyanis these days who write history with their own thing. So what was the legacy of Alauddin Khilji? So Alauddin Khilji happened to invade Daulatabad, which was a prime center, and just neighboring to, like just hardly 7 kilometers towards northeast of Daulatabad, you had Ganjirawa, the site which I had shown you before. So you had like just 7 kilometers northeast of Daulatabad, you had Ganjirawa, who was already an established saint. People were coming from all sides of villages to pay their respects to him. And in 1308, you find Malik Ambar is invading Daulatabad, Devgiri fort, and he does a lot of war booty and takes it away. But what he left after that? This is something which war is doing. But what after that? Alauddin Khilji had a very famous court poet called Amir Khusro. And it is believed that Amir Khusro during that time happened to stay for around 3 to 4 months in Daulatabad area, and he tried to understand this area, and thereafter he wrote a beautiful Diwan is a collection of poetry of him, which is known as Diwan-e-Nihayatul Kamal. Nihayatul Kamal means something like extremely out of the expression. Kamal is like it's something very extraordinary, miraculous sort of. So he writes Diwan-e-Nihayatul Kamal, where he is talking about the abundance, richness and cultural plurality as well as the cultural diversity of this region, and he praises it. And that is the time when we also find he is resonating with the linguistic abilities of the people in that area. It was believed that these people of this region were to a large extent were not speaking the Urdu or the Hindi language, which was popular in the northern part of India. But this is also the time when he was able to communicate with people. In the Nihayatul Kamal, he is talking about his communications, his literary exchanges with the people in that region. So to a certain extent, there was a cultural context, there was a cultural exchange which was going out in that area. So, to certain extent this was the legacy of Khalji which we happen to see and which continued, because with Amir Khusro there was a literary tradition which continued in this area, because Amir Khusro is also known as Tutiye-Hind, because he is considered to be parrot of India, because he was one of the most prolific poet and a literary person, and even today like we have not created anything of his par excellence. After that, a very important thing which happened was Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who changed his capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, and he brought about the change of the capital, as I already discussed about, because of the Mongols' threat. Delhi was consistently being invaded by the Mongol invading tribes, and so Muhammad bin Tughlaq was in a idea that if he will change the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, because Daulatabad was in the center of India, and because it was it was having the Vindhyachal mountains who can cover it from the northern parts of India, and it has good rivers. So, it was convenient for, he thought that it will be convenient to safeguard it from all kinds of invasions, and therefore, he changes the capital from Delhi to Devgiri, the fort which we saw in the previous slide, and he called it, he gave the place a new name called Daulatabad. It is believed that Muhammad bin Tughlaq was so much obsessed with idea of changing the city that he made an order to the people of his city in Delhi that every person has to go from Delhi to Daulatabad. And it is believed that one night when he ordered
government administration or the population in general?
everybody, he made it a mandatory order, and it is like to certain extent it could be an exaggeration. He went to his palace, on the top of his palace he went there, and when he saw in the night that not a single candle was lit, then he felt that yes, now everybody has left. So, that way he, and the biggest reason for him to make this move happen was thrown upon the Sufi saints. It was strictly ordered that all these Sufi Islamic saints who were living in Delhi have to leave Delhi and have to go to Daulatabad. Probably the reason for his such a strict command was, it was believed that people in Delhi in those times were so much enamored by the ideas of Sufi that many times when he was giving hard hitting decisions, like for example, when you have a very strict government, right now in India we are having like today the notes are changed or something like that. He made such a kind of decision also that overnight he decided that there will not be the face value, there will be a face value currency. So, all the gold and the silver coins were taken away from the city, from the circulation, and the copper coins were instituted. So, because of such kinds of decisions of his, people were really not happy, and people were saying a lot of bad words against him, and Sufis were supporting them. So, he was strictly very much antagonized by the presence of Sufis in Delhi. So, he ordered that all these Sufis have to go, and therefore 1400 Sufis were made to leave Delhi in whatever capacity they have to go, and they were pushed to come to Daulatabad. And so they all came. It was in those time it was a 40-day journey. They traveled for 40 days and came to I'm so sorry, I'm making you sleep. Please, like if you're feeling bored, just let me know. I don't want to make it a lousy kind of a class. Yeah, if you have any questions in between, because we did 2 phases. So, if you have any questions, let's have a little break of the session. Yes.
So they moved from Kholabad to Daulatabad, or?
Initially, they are leaving from Delhi to. So, actually, Daulatabad is going to be the new capital, but because they are Sufis, they are the mystic believers. They will never appreciate going and living just beside the king or in the royal city. So, that is why they decided to come to a place not so close to the capital city, which is going to be the new capital city, but little far from it. So, Khuldabad and Daulatabad are around 16 kilometers apart. Not even 16, they are around 12 kilometers apart. Yes.
So I'm not an expert in this, but it seems to me that when Tughlaq made this decision to, ordered all the Sufis to go to Daulatabad. I mean, politically speaking, it's not a good move.
Certainly not.
Yeah, so
He was criticized also, and this change of capital was only for a year. So he came, he settled everything, he established the city, and then he decided, no, it's a false idea, let's go back. So this is what emperors do, That's why we want democracy. So
before Tughlaq, if we go back to Khalji and he was invading Daulatabad, right? So was he kind of trying to maybe establish some political alliances with the established Sufi durgas to kind of like help Khalji ease into the population or maybe legitimize his presence there?
actually, one thing we have to understand, like not every time the religious authorities try to have a pacifying policy with the state, because in those times when organized educational systems were not so much popular, such Sufi and Bhakti learning centers, such Sufi learnings or religious centers were basically about the educational centers. And like today, even in those times, education was never a dependent kind of an institution. It was an autonomous even in those times. So never the Sufis or so-called religious heads would like to pacify or having an alliance kind of a relationship with the state. They will always like to be more independent, more autonomous. So if they feel like the king is not doing right, they can criticize him whenever they feel like. So that was a kind of relationship which Muhammad bin Tughlaq was finding very disturbing. So this is a very important aspect to understand, that it's an Islamic rule, the king is Islamic, the religious institution is Islamic, yet there is a dissonance, yet there is a kind of a distance, or what I could say, there is a kind of a critical relationship which the two bodies have towards each other. And that was the reason, one of the reason Muhammad bin Tughlaq felt that I want to change the capital. And so all these 1400 Sufis, they were forced. It is believed that almost all the prime well-known silsilas, more or less all the 16 silsilas which were prevalent in Delhi, they all came to Khuldabad. And initially Khuldabad was known as Rauza. Rauza means shrine, or Rauza is like a holy place. It's a holy shrine actually. So initially Khuldabad was known as Rauza, and all these 1400 Sufis, they settled there, and it was not a very prime urban location. So majority of these Sufis were catering their mystical services or mystical teachings among the rural population between Daulatabad and Paitan. There is another very important city which is in the congruence of Daulatabad, Aurangabad and Paitan. Paitan was also known as the Dakshin Kashi, or the southern seat of Banaras. How many of you have heard about Banaras? Okay, that's good. So Banaras is a very famous city in India, which is known for its Hindu legacy, or I would say the so-called Indian religious, Indian non-Islamic religious centers. So we find the Buddhist center also, we find Jain center also, and we find Hindu centers as well. And because Banaras was pretty far, because it was on the banks of the Ganges, so many of the people in south, especially in Deccan, they believe that not everybody can go to Kashi. So for them, Paitan is like Dakshin Kashi. Dakshin means south, and Kashi is another name given for that. So Paitan is considered to be the southern Kashi, and majority of the people who can't afford to go or can't afford to have a priest from Banaras, they went for the priest of the Paitan. So it so happened that when these Sufi saints came to Rauza, that is Khuldabad near Daulatabad, many of the clientele, many of the people who were following the priests of Paitan started having the devotion or the following for the priest or the Sufi saints in Khuldabad as well. And this created a different kind of sampradaya system, different kind of a congruence of the beliefs and faiths. This is the time when we find 4 different sampradayas or 4 different teachings of religious kind start emerging in between Daulatabad, Khuldabad and Paitan, which are Sufi, Hindu among Hindu also we have three different schools. We have Shaivism, Vaishnavism and Nath. Nath was the mystical school of Hindus, and it was so well commonly shared between Sufis and Nath sect, because both the Sufis and Nath believe in the mystical theory of philosophy, and they both carry the yogic practices. And this is the time when many of these Sufi saints of Daulatabad started having regular conversations and theological and philosophical dialogues with the Sufi, the saints of the Nath Sampradaya. And many of their common stories got shared, many of their legends got shared. This is also the time when very famous friend of Amir Khusro, Amir Hassan Shizi, who is also known as Hazrat Amin Hassan Dehalvi, happened to come with the Chishti Silsila Sufis, and he died in the same city. In 1357 he died, and he was the first person of the Sufi order who wrote a Tazkirat in Deccan. His very famous book is known as Fawadul Fawd, which was written while his stay in Daulatabad. And this is first of its kind of Tazkirat, which is talking about the teacher and student relationship, and he is doing it in a narrative form. So this kind of a tradition, now we find there is an expansion. So this is a literary tradition, this is a philosophical tradition, and it is also with an Islamic approach, with an Islamic understanding as well. So this is like expansion through the Vaishnavism, through the, you know what is Vaishnavism? Okay. This is Vaishnavism, like of course you are learning about the Islamic school, but this is also the time when, because if you know Amir Khusro and Abdur Rahim Khana, who were very famous literary persons of those times, they have vividly written about Krishna. Lord Krishna you must be knowing. So the school which follows Lord Krishna and his various forms is known as Vaishnavism. And Shaivism is Lord Shiva, have you heard about? Some of you, Om and all. So the school which follows Lord Shiva is known as Shaivism, and Nath is like, it's actually a Shakta cult. It's a pagan religion, what you call it as, where you worship the Shiva and Shakti, like a woman part of the Lord Shiva. So Nath people are talking about that. These are different, and Nath is fairly mystical, like, and it was very interesting to see over here that this is the time when many of these Sufi Islamic saints are in-depthly trying to understand the Shaiva and Nath ideology. And there are continuous dialogues happening them, like many of them are very good friends, like Nath saints are living in the Sufi Khanka, and Sufis are very open about discussing, open dialogues are happening. So all these 1400 Sufis who came here, like no matter Muhammad bin Tughlaq left in 1328 back to Delhi, but this whole 1400 Sufis were opening new avenues to philosophical debates, philosophical dialogues, and many of the exchange of ideas. There is a very famous, like unfortunately we lost that scholar, a scholar called Aditya Behel. Please do read him if you get time to. So Aditya Behel is talking about the, no problem. Aditya Behel is talking about the narratives which are exchanged. So many times when you are dealing with the communities, so when you deal with community, you try to give them the ideas of the no, it's all right. When you deal with like masses, you try to speak in their own language, speak their language. So in that whole process, many of the localized genres of legends are being rephrased or retranslated or reformulated in such a way that the message goes to the society. So that is the time when many of these Sufi saints are picking up the local legends and altering the figures and the protagonist in it and making it more communicable to the community society. And this is the way these old Sufi saints started expanding, or what you could say, promoting their, spread out their messages to the society. Yes, you had something to ask?
Yeah, just a very quick question.
Yeah.
So you talked about three
Yes.
era. And
So it's more of a pre-Mughal era.
right. So my question is, when we have this discourse in the public, and I wanted to know, so academically, the scholarship, how is the scholarship divided with this notion of there was an attempt to invade India?
Actually, this is the area of intervention now, because you know the predominant theory was it was all the invasion culture. Wherever Islam went, it always went with a sword and a horse. But this is kind of a narrative which is getting a lot of research is going on. Aditya Behel, Jack Hawley, Carl Ernst, all these people are doing it. So how far it has reached the popular discourse is up to us. It has still not reached the textbook, because it should reach the textbook. Only then it will make the larger effect, because then the students right from the early age will get to know that this is how the Islam was spread. Or I won't even say Islam, it's about how the culture spread. Usually we always think that it's always the sword, but it was not. So these are various debates. And another important debate which is actually happening about the pluralistic and multicultural aspect of Islam. It is when you talk about South Asian Islam, it has its own texture. It is more pluralistic. It's more plural in its attempt. It's not what you could say. It's not unidirectional. It is a little different in north. It is little different in Deccan. As we go south, it's little more different. So why it picked up why Islam had its own regional variations? There was a very famous study done by Carl Ernst on this context. In fact, there is a wonderful book on eternal gardens by Carl Ernst, which if you get time, please do read. It's on Kuldabad, all the Sufi saints of Kuldabad and how they were all spreading the whole ideas and how these things were going on, how the whole idea of plural ideas and mystic schools of Islam were working and how these Sufis were working about. In fact, there is another theory which is propounded by Dushandik, who is an emerging scholar. He says that many of these so-called Sufis were actually not Sufis. We can better call them Santa or Bhakt. Sant means a sage and Bhakt means a follower. So many of them were actually not Sufi, but just because it's like a genre, it's like a popular term. So anyone who is a person from a Muslim name or a background, if he is talking about some religious mysticism, he has to be Sufi, which is not necessary, because Sufi means someone who is interpreting Quran, who is talking about the teachings of Muhammad Paigambar to us, is actually a Sufi. So many a time these so-called Islamic, so-called people coming from Islam are actually talking about the general philosophy, general methodology, general understanding, and fortunately or unfortunately they are classified as Sufi. So this is how things happened. So many of these so-called 1400 and many more which started moving around in Deccan after that time could we call them as Sufi, or were they just Sant and Bhakt? This is another ideology which is being propagated. Now another very important person who actually contributed in the expansion of an empire or a concept of state on an Islamic lines was Malik Ambar. He becomes a person, that's his mausoleum, that's his tomb in Kuldabad. It's a beautiful tomb. If you ever get a chance to go to India, do visit his beautiful tomb. It's beautifully taken. Malik Ambar had a wonderful past to his biographic journey is amazing. Person from rags to riches is something like he was coming from a small tribe in Ethiopia, and when this whole so he was captured by some enterprising slave traders, and he was taken away from his family at a very young age of 7. He was brought to Arabia. He was sold to a Qazi, and then that particular Qazi trained him for another 7 to 8 years, made him a learned person in all crafts of business, armory, becoming a good soldier. And after training him and teaching him lots of skills of learning as well, when the Qazi somehow could not afford him, he sold him back. So, he was again sold twice, and then one person from a chief of a royal family of Ahmednagar, which is a neighboring city to Aurangabad, he bought him. And at the age of around late 20s, he happened to be in the royal circles of Aurangabad. Now, when I have to go a little bit beyond, when Muhammad bin Tughlaq left Daulatabad, he left it to one of the chiefs. But soon after, when he went back to Delhi, it was the tussle started going on among his chiefs itself, and they all could not remain to be ruling under the surveillance of Delhi. So, they decided to have their own small kingdoms, and therefore, we have a terminology called Sultanates of Deccan or Deccan Sultan, Sultans of Deccan. It is a very famous terminology used for 5 different royal houses which emerged after the decline of the Muhammad bin Tughlaq's rule in Deccan. So, initially there was one house called Bahmani Sultans, and then it got divided into 5. You had Barid Shahi, Imad Shahi, Nizam Shahi, Adil Shahi and Qutub Shahi. These are the 5 different dynasties which emerged in this area, and Nizam Shahi was the seat which took over the Daulatabad after the Bahmanis. So, when Malik Ambar happened to be in 1558 onwards, 1560s onwards, he came into the royal circles of Daulatabad, and thereafter he decided to expand the notion of Islamic rule or the more organized system of administration in this area. And this is the time when he is posing threat to Mughals. This is the time when Mughals are emerging in northern India, and by 1601 they happen. By the beginning of the 17th century, they come to Deccan and they start looking for the more prospects in Deccan. And this is the time when Malik Ambar is well organized. He is more or less a de facto ruler of the area, and he is well respected as well. So, this is another aspect of dissonance. So, now again you have 2 Islamic state. So, we are talking about 2 different levels, like we are talking about Islam on the state machinery and Islam in the society. So, how people perceive Islam. So, you may be surprised to know that Malik Ambar, even though he was a Muslim king of his times, de facto king, I should not say king, his majority of the army constituted of Maratha Sardars. 70% of his army constituted of Hindu Maratha Sardar. Just try googling a person called Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, Shivaji. So, Shivaji is a person who belonged to this community of Marathas. So, before the birth of Shivaji, it was Marathas who were predominantly supporting the Malik Ambar and his empire and to expand. So, till 1626, Malik Ambar gave stiff competition to the Mughal kings, and Jahangir actually had a dream once. You must be knowing about the famous king, Mughal king Jahangir. Yes or no? Okay, this is all South Asian history. You will be you'll be learning about it. So, Jahangir, in fact, like was so much fumigated by this whole, like he was so much angry with Malik Ambar that once he had a dream that he is killing Malik Ambar through a bow and arrow, and he could sever his head from his body. And so, he was so happy. The next day, he ordered his court painter to paint a painting of that, and it is one of the most very famous painting which still remains in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, which you can see it. So, Malik Ambar was one such person who created a Islamic legacy of a different kind. He was the one who patronized these Sufi saints, and in fact, all these Sufi saints had a great amount of patronage in different parts of various 5 dynasties or the various Deccan sultanates, and Nizam Shahi of Daulatabad happened to be one of them. After the death of, this is Aurangzeb Alami creating Aurangabad. So, these are the various monuments which you can see in the vector. These are the various monuments of the Islamic architectural style which happened to be done during the times of the Aurangzeb. After the death of Malik Ambar, Mughals took over the city of Aurangabad, the present Daulatabad. And Aurangzeb, who was the son of very famous Mughal emperor called Shah Jahan, was appointed as the more or less like a state officer you call it as Subedar of Deccan, and he was brought over here and he started expanding the Deccan Empire. The major purpose among various reasons why Mughals wanted to be in Deccan was, one of course was the wealth of Deccan, and another important thing was that they wanted to combat the Portuguese, because this is the time when Portuguese are already there in the coastal area. And because none of these Deccan sultans were powerful enough to defeat the Portuguese, so Mughal always, because Mughal were in a very good position in Gujarat, so they wanted to have similar kind of control in Deccan, so that they can do away with the Portuguese, so that the Indian Ocean trade could have more control in their hand, like they can control more of the Indian Ocean trade. Somehow the local politics never helped them out, because Shivaji came up as a anti-person. In fact, he played a dual politics, like he joined Portuguese and he also joined some of the Mughal chiefs. So the major reason for the Mughals to enter into Deccan was not for the spread of Islam, but basically to control the economy of India, because which was going defunct. Majority of the coastal trade, Indian Ocean trade, which was happening through coast, was majority of its profits were taken over by the Dutch, especially the Portuguese, and it was taken to the Europe, which certainly was a big loss for the Mughals and for India. And that is the reason that Mughals started entering in the Deccan. With the coming of the Mughal, this is the first time when Shia Sunni thing is becoming prominent. Professor Iqbal has already taught you about Shia Sunni thing. Mughals were predominantly Sunni, and majority of the Deccan sultanates were Shia. This is the time when Shia and Sunni communities, Shia ideologically, they are coming together, and the persons or the school, the philosophical thought which is bridging them together is the Sufi saints, or the various Sufi dialogues which are happening in this region at that particular time. This is the mausoleum or the tomb of the very famous Mughal emperor Aurangzeb, because he believed in, at the end of his life, he was a very devout saint. He was often called as Darwish. Darwish means a saint. So he never wanted his tomb to be very elaborate, extremely rich. He wanted to have a very simple. In fact, this whole marble tiling was also done by a British colonial administrative officers in late 19th century. Before that, it was all in wood. It was a very simple mud with simple soil it was made. So this was the legacy of Aurangzeb which was done. And during the times of the Aurangzeb also, it is often considered that Aurangzeb was a very famous iconoclast and he demolished various temples, but it is so much different in Deccan. In Deccan, we hardly find any incident where ever Aurangzeb, the famous Mughal emperor, ever ordered for demolition of any temple. On the contrary, in his account books, he gave various amount of donations to various temples, along with various dargahs and Sufi saints also to grow together. And this is the time when we find various kinds of various kinds of Sufi centers as well as temples. They evolved in their ideology of philosophies and they exchanged the ideas. This is a very famous dargah of Kanifnath, and this is Sayyid Sadat Dargah. There is a very famous story that Kanifnath was a saint of the tribal communities of Madhi region in Ahmednagar. And Kanifnath was fairly respected. Even today people go for the pilgrimage. But once in late 16th century, Kanifnath was passing through. In fact, like, because it's a legend, so it's a legend says that he was flying from the Khanqa, above the Khanqa of Sayyid Sadat in Paitan. Sayyid Sadat got very angry, so he threw his shoe on him, and the shoe hit Kanifnath, and Kanifnath got little scared, like, who has the power to hit me? I am already such a powerful saint. So Kanifnath got down and he said, like, why you hit me? And Sayyid Sadat said, because you were making lots of noise when you were passing. So since then Kanifnath said sorry to him and he became his disciple. Since then, there are twice the shrine, the pilgrimage happens. So, till 2010, every year the pilgrimage from Kanifnath used to come to Sayyid Sadat Dargah. They used to pay their respect, and there used to be proper bhajans in that Dargah, and similarly people of Dargah used to go to Kanifnath. Somehow in the last decade, this thing is dying. Now there is a strict ban in both the dargahs that Muslims are not allowed to come in this dargah, in Kanifnath's dargah, and Sayyid Sadat also says that no bhajans are allowed. Why this dissolution and dissonance is happening in after 2010, which was not there till last 300 years. A similar episode is of, this is the famous Khandoba temple, and this is the famous Shahnur Mian Dargah of Shahnur Mian the Hambi of Aurangabad, where you have two such things. Shahnur Mian was a very famous urban saint. He was the first urban Sufi saint of Aurangabad, and this is the Khandoba. Khandoba is like a, what you could say, is like Lord Krishna of Lord Shiva of the Shaivite cult people, and the followers of both these shrines, like whether Khandoba or Shahnur Mian, they both used to pay their respects in their respective zones. But since last 10 years, this thing has also gone down. In fact, they used to share the legends of each other. Nile Green writes about it extensively.
So this is before the BJP government. This has nothing to do
No,
with
it is not. It was even after BJP.
Well, no, but I mean,
So I really don't know. Like, I don't have answers to it. Why this is happening? So this is what I had something to share with you all. I hope I didn't bore you. So if you have any questions, let's keep some 10 to 15 minutes for our discussions. If you have any questions, if you have any comments to give, anything like.
So Narendra Modi's government does not have anything to do with this recent end to syncretism.
Actually, this is a very
That's what
Question.
from what you're saying, it's this started this partition.
actually, this whole right wing and becoming too much closed to one's own faith is something which is happening globally. It is not something which has because Richard Hayden, who did the study of Kanifnath and Sayyid Sadat Dargah, they started doing that study somewhere in 1990s. 1980s they started. So I'll show you the picture. This picture, if you could see, it's of 1992 March. Yeah, this is the time when Barbary Masjid was demolished. So this is the time when this is the present site. This is the website of today of Kanifnath, and this is of 1992. So you see the dramatic change even in the style of architecture. Previously it was dome, now it is a proper South Indian Gopuram Shikhara. So it has to do with the changes which have unfolded in last 50 years. And Richard Hayden's book, which is talking about this thing, it's not just talking about what is happening in India, it is talking about something which is happening in Algeria, which is something happening in Kosovo, which is something happening in Indonesia. It's happening everywhere. Like, why this is happening? The answers are not in the present. We have to question ourselves that where we went wrong, probably in the textbooks, where we taught that everything happened with invasion. We never try to rationalize. I don't want to be a sermon. I want inputs from you all. Like, I want you to speak. Yes, please.
I have a question. This may be a little bit unrelated, but what is the largest sect of Islam in India right now?
Actually, it's, I won't say there is as such, like, because, I won't say anything in that, like, because, no, I don't think even that is true, because, because even if you are Sunni from Deccan and if you are Sunni from Lucknow, you will never. I have friends in Aurangabad and in Hyderabad to a large extent who never want to marry a person from Lucknow. So this has nothing to do, like, you know, when you say a sect, do you have a unified thing in it? So there is a very famous geographer in India, like Azazuddin Ahmad. If you really want to begin with to understand the community cultures in India, you should read the first chapter of his book, The Political Geography of India, where he is talking about that the communities in India are defined, or in South Asia, are defined more by the region than by the religion, which even Amir Khusro in those times said. In 11th and 12th century, when Amir Khusro was writing his Nur-i-Sipar or Khazan-ul-Futuh, he was also talking about the culture of India, culture of Delhi, culture of Awadh first, before talking about, and then when he goes to Deccan and he talks about Nihayatul Kamal, Diwan-e Nihayatul Kamal, he is talking about Deccan culture in exclusive. So the culture is more physiographic in nature. It is more environmental than philosophical. Before being philosophical, it is more ecological. It's more the geography, the surrounding, it's more the environment. You are an American first before, even if you have your European origin, many of us, or when you come to South Asia and live for another 50 years or so, you become more Americanized than being a South Asian or an African or whatever you belong to. So we have to, somewhere the question lies with us, where we have gone wrong. Anyway, whatever you, so I really don't have an answer to your question that who dominates even in the Islamic community-wise sect in India. We have regional, like we have UP Islamic population, we have Delhi Islamic population from Delhi, we have Islams from Bihar, Muslim from Bihar, we have Muslims from Aurangabad. Muslims from Aurangabad also differ themselves from Muslims of Hyderabad. So
you wouldn't say they identify with like a particular sect, whether it be like Shia or Sunni or...
they do have, but like before even that, like they recognize themselves with their place of origin. They recognize themselves more with the space and place before the sect. Of course, they are Muslim, but before diversifying this sect, they are more Muslim of that region first.
More like a village mentality.
I won't even call it village mentality. For Hyderabadi Muslims, you cannot call them village. They are Hyderabadi Muslim. They are like elitist. Like Hyderabadi Islamic people are the most elitist, well-groomed Islamic population of probably the entire world. Hyderabadi Deccani Muslims are known for that. Yes, anything, any other, like, if you have any comment, it would be, I will welcome that. Professor Iqbal, if you have, I would love to have your.
I think what she's trying to say is that, like, when you look at India, it's very different from a place like China. Like,
Exactly.
India, linguistically and culturally, is divided by many different languages, and the way that community is organized is by caste. So by these sorts of endogamous sort of communities, right? So the idea that you have one ideological tradition that spans the entire area is highly unlikely, right? So like you would probably have more, you know, if you're living in Miami, you would have more in common with an American Jew that lives on the beach
That's
than you would have with a French Catholic, right? Or someone, you know, from another. So just because you have the same religion doesn't necessarily mean that there's that connection, right? So,
Exactly.
And then, like, for instance, I mean, I work on North and South Indian Muslims. So there's a massive divide in India between North Indians and South Indians.
South Indian
Like,
Muslims.
massive cultural differences.
Exactly.
Basically, they're completely different language families. So, like, people in Tamil Nadu, the way that they see and interact with religion and politics is very different from the way that North Indians do. So Tamil Muslims see themselves very much as Tamil. The Tamil language that goes back 2,000 years, that culture is something that's unique and defines them in very different ways than sort of the religious politics that happens in North India. So in a way, even though India is a big country, and we say, okay, India is the largest democracy and stuff like that, but it's really a society that's fragmented in many ways.
That's
It's
true.
colonial creation.
Exactly.
Unlike a place like Persia or China, where they had the ability to amalgamate all these people into a single language, into a single type of cultural construct.
Yeah. In South Asia,
Power,
it's
yeah. So I
exactly.
think that's what she's trying to explain is like this.
Yeah, South Asia is more diverse in its context. Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, like the way you have Persia to be predominantly Shia, and Iraq to be more Sunni in that way. So we don't find that thing in India. Of course, we have some schools like Deoband school is there, which is more about the traditional school, and we have Aligarh school, which is more modernist. But still, we find Shia and Sunnis divide is not so extreme. The way even in Pakistan, it's more vocal, the Shia-Sunni divide.
A lot of this also just goes, the fragmentation also goes back to the partition.
Exactly.
The partition has really exacerbated a lot of these issues. And then the opposite happened in Pakistan, where almost everything that is pre-Islamic or Hindu or stuff like that, everything is erased in Pakistan in a very visceral way, or it's kept as a sort of a weird remnant of the past.
Exactly.
So yeah, so I think it makes you, I think it makes us poorer for understanding the religious, the complexity of religious history, when you can only see it as like, this is a Muslim issue, a Hindu issue, that sort of thing.
That's right.
All right, so let's give Dr. Sengar a...
I hope it was good.
Professor, can you tell us about the course you're teaching?
Yeah, in the next spring semester, I'll be teaching a course of ethnohistory of indigenous communities in global perspective, with special reference to South Asia and India. So I'll be talking about various indigenous communities which live in India, how we define them, and what has been their cultural and historical evolution, how they became what they are. So
Okay, so another awesome course for you guys to take next semester.
Yeah.
All right, so good luck with your midterms. Next week there's no class. Work on your midterms, and then we'll have class in 18th. All right?
sure.
Take care. Good luck.
Produced by Academic Video Services within the Division of Information Technology at Florida International University.